And crimes have no ethnicity. Crimes are not political. Even if a politician is committing a crime, he's a criminal. A lawyer committing a crime is a criminal. A doctor committing a crime is a criminal. And they belong to no ethnicity. But I also agree there are other methods that have not been used maximally before, like community policing, like enhancing the capability of Kenya Police Reservice, most of whom were disarmed in the north, remunerating them so that also these KPR, again, don't get tempted to misuse those firearms because they are hungry, and also other interventions, including a Marshall Plan. The ultimate solution to setting free the Kenya of the North from the hands of criminals is a Marshall Development Plan of infrastructure, electricity, roads, hospitals, schools, etc. And that is in the Kenya Kwanza plan. So I'll be collaborating with the other agencies to make sure that as we deal with the criminals, we are also opening up that area so that it is easy to convince even those who have been socialized to believe that only crime can give them a livelihood, the alternative livelihoods that can help them feed their children. Finally, very quickly on NACADA, there is a process which is ongoing about enhancing the control aspects on alcohol and narcotic drugs. My 1 second take of how else we can improve this is to use the education curriculum review that is taking place through a task force now to see how we can just try and resocialize our children, because the drug addiction menace has cascaded to very young sectors of our population, and only the education system, which is the software that instills positive moral values, can perhaps be used even as we enhance the control of these substances among our population. And from the Honorable Emase, the issue of spouses and citizenship is one of the reform measures which I am informed is already ongoing, to make sure that there are no delays. If the principal spouse, for example, has citizenship, the other spouse application should not delay, and so forth and so on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point of information, Honorable Chair. Point of information.
Who do you want to inform?
I want to inform the nominee.
Okay.
It's fundamental, Honorable Chair, at the level. Maybe I wanted to inform the nominee, Honorable Chair, of an experience which you and I know, what was done in Uganda by President Museveni to pacify one of the most, or one of the worst areas called Karamoja areas. When Museveni took over, Honorable Chair, you know that. He has pacified the entire place without using this extrajudicial killing. And if you go down to that side from Moroto, Amudat, that is where, of course, our community live, you rarely see anybody with a gun. But if you had to go there, maybe 1980s, everybody had a gun. What happened in Uganda is not happening in Kenya, Honorable. So that's information, Honorable Chair, that I want to share with the nominee, now that also Uganda is our friends, that he can also enjoy that information from Uganda. I thank you.
Yes. Ferdinand Mishi Daud Amisi. Yes, Honorable Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe the good professor did not answer my question to my satisfaction, particularly in application of the law, that there are two laws that are operating in this country. The laws of some parts, the 40% of the country, and the 60%. And that is why the honorable members from the arid and semi-arid lands have raised very heavy issues on this floor.
I thought he said that he acknowledges persistent and consistent discrimination of people living in the north, and that it's going to be his duty to make sure that this becomes part of our history. He didn't say those words, but that's how I understood him. Is that so, Professor?
That is so, and I said because many of them are administrative measures, they are not legal measures, we will sit down with the leaders and communities to see how we can make them more human rights friendly. But I did caution that some of these measures are critical to secure our borders, but they should not be used to punish citizens. So increasingly, no person from any part of Kenya should feel being treated differently. And so I will be seeking the support and counsel from the leadership from these areas to see what can be improved without hurting critical aspects of national security.
The next batch of 4, Ferdinand, Mishi, Daud, and Amisi, all honorable members of the committee. Each members.
I want to, on the behalf of the police service, National Police Service, ask you a question about the review of their terms of service. I think I've been complaining that poorly enumerated, and that's why I think some of them are involved in the bribes and, of course, the killings that we see. What do you intend to do on their terms of service and particularly the payments? Thank you.
Thank you. Mishi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, first on a rider on Emase's questions, I would like to ask the nominee that how are you going to do to destroy the cartels and the syndicates in the police forces who collude with drug barons? And my question will be on the small arms. Honorable Speaker, I understand Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda created the Regional Center on Small Arms in the Great Lake region. And they also established Nairobi Protocol with the aim of ensuring that they reduce illicit small arms proliferation in the country. But despite that, what we have witnessed in this country, that any Dick and Harry, anybody who wants to access firearms, he can access those arms. And that is why we have rampant insecurity in this country. What measures are you going to put in place to ensure that only those people who are authorized and they seek permission from the relevant department in the ministry, in the relevant ministry, that they can access firearms so that we can reduce insecurity in this country? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Mishi. Amisi. Oh, sorry, Dawood first.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Speaker. To the nominee, Professor Kindiki, the previous administration established a lot of sub-counties or districts, locations, and boundaries have been an issue between many counties, between my county and your county, Professor Kindiki, as well as counties in Nyanza and Rift Valley, and because the docket of the districts and the boundaries would squarely fall under your administration, under the national administration, how are you going to handle the boundaries issue, as well as personnel for the new districts and locations which were created, especially even in my constituency, more than 5 or 7 years back, and we still chiefs and many places in Meru County and in Kenya in general do not have the sub-county DCCs and ACCs deployed. So that's what I want to ask. I know between our counties, you were in one of the meetings together with the governors and the members of parliament regarding the boundary issue between Tharaka, Nithi, and Meru County. I want to know how you will handle this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Amisi?
Thank you, Chair. The issue of refugees, you've written articles on refugees. I saw it somewhere. And the repatriation of refugees and closing of Dadaab refugee camp was a hot topic in the previous regime.
how are you going to handle it going forward? Are you going to revise the decision that was made before in regard to that? Influx of foreign nationals is also a big issue here in Kenya. We are going towards regional blocks, East African Community expanding, African Free Trade, African Continental Free Trade area. We are opening up our borders too much, and in long run, we are going to be overflown. To remember what has happened in South Africa because of opening up borders, then you start having xenophobic attacks to foreigners. Close related to that, the NHIF of the police officers has been these ones, and for especially the prison officers who are always complaining, and they don't have trade unions to complain on their behalf.
Another 4, you can answer those.
Thank you, Chairman. A manifesto to review the terms of service for the police officers, and some of the complaints that the officers make about their working conditions are actually right, they are correct, they are justified. So we shall be looking at how to handle that within the resource constraints of the country and also within the independence and mandate of the Salaries and Remunerations Commission. But one way of even achieving some of the things that the non-benefit aspects of welfare is by reviewing the ministry's existing budget to remove non-core expenditure and deploying that expenditure to facilitate officers to protect our country, to protect our people and their property. With regard to cartels and drug barons, the Cabinet Secretary provides policy direction to the National Police Service and the other formations under the ministry. Through this oversight, which is provided in law, we will make sure that no protection is afforded to any officer or any person who is associated with drug cartels and drug barons. So we are going to perform our duty to provide the policy oversight on our forces, because when the instructions and policy direction come from the top, it's easier to manage than when there is none. With regard to proliferation of small arms and light weapons, I would like to respond as follows: that one, we may have to review and look at the framework for licensing of firearms in this country to ensure that the right people are the people who are licensed to carry firearms. Secondly, with regard to firearms already in possession of in the hands of criminals, we will have to review our policy on disarmament, demobilization and reintegration to ensure that we mop out firearms in the wrong hands. And this is associated with the program that we discussed earlier in this session about how to ensure that we pacify and make it peaceful in most of the countries where bandits are reigning supreme. With regard to sub-counties, all sub-counties, locations, sub-locations which have already been established by law should have personnel. So I'll be sitting with all leaders who are representing areas which have this kind of needs, and this will be something that will implement with immediate effect so long as a sub-county has been gazetted in accordance with the law and the locations and sub-locations have been created in accordance with the established procedure. With regard to boundaries, The Constitution of 2010 froze the review of boundaries and applied the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. But the Constitution also in Article 188 requires a review of boundaries, county boundaries, through a process which is independent from the electoral and boundaries process. So some of these historical issues will be resolved through that way. But in the meantime, the struggles around boundaries are normally struggles that are fueled by political leaders. What I know from my experience as a leader is that there are genuine grievances among citizens about ownership of property. And therefore, the ongoing reforms on the land information management system that will provide the cadastre of the entire country will help remove these issues on who owns which property, because there are some people with title deeds on top of other people's property. The Ministry of Lands has just completed the cadastre for Nairobi City. I have been fortunate to see that cadastre, and you'll be shocked, people owning plots on roundabouts, on top of people's buildings, and inside Karura Forest. So once this cadastre process, and the Kenya Kwanza, the executive order signed by the President on 12th of October, has already identified this area of land information management, rolling out of these limbs and the preparation of the national cadastre as one of the reforms that will be taken across the country, so that you know where your property is and nobody has a title deed on top of somebody else's farm. But the boundaries issue will have to be resolved in accordance with Article 188 of the Constitution and in accordance with the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. Finally, on the issue of refugees, the traditional methods of providing durable solutions to the refugee problem, namely voluntary repatriation, local integration, and resettlement to third countries, the ministry will pursue them a little more robustly, especially considering genuine cases of local integration for refugees who have lived in this country for 40, 50 years and are not under any negative security profile. There is no need of sending somebody home who was born here and is 55 years old. He's going home. He's going to a country just to die. He's going to a country of his death as opposed to a country where he has lived all his life. But we'll couple this with the resettlement and as well as voluntary repatriation for those who want to voluntarily return to their countries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll now give the floor to the Honorable Mukami, Morugara, and Mule, and Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Chair. The nominee, Professor Kidiki, congratulations. Professor, Kenya has been experienced numerous disasters in the past, ranging from bomb blast, terror attacks, floods, collapsing of buildings, to name but a few. Whenever this happens, it only confirms lack of preparedness. Despite having a national emergency response unit, as the cabinet secretary in charge of this unit, what measures will you put in place to raise the level of preparedness to respond effectively to the emergency and national disaster? And finally, through the chair, Professor Kidiki, you come from our region. Our children, our future generation, are getting finished because of alcohol. I don't know what you are going to do, and I am praying, if God give you this chance to serve as a cabinet minister, I'm praying, kindly try, if you go to our schools and in the surrounding areas, our children are finished. Thank you, Professor Kidiki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Your voter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it's the voters who have sent me to him to ask these questions on their behalf, and they are listening.
You're entitled to one.
No. This, you have to indulge me because of, but I'll be very fast in asking these questions. Number one, it's from the border riders, the school bus drivers, and everybody. It is welcome that you are going to improve the terms of service of the police officers, including their remuneration and housing. However, we know as a matter of fact that on every road, these officers do erect illegal road tolls, roadblocks, and stops so that they can extort money from poor citizens of the country, including border riders. What will you do as the minister, and as soon as you have improved these terms, to end that corruption which happens? What are you going to do to ensure that we do not hear of these illegal roadblocks and tolls, etc.? Number two, the police officers themselves are asking. We have a huge shortage of police officers in the country. The ratio is possibly 1 to 6,000 persons, which is not acceptable because the world standards are about 1 to 300 people. Do you have any plans whatsoever to increase the number of police officers in the country so that security per person is enhanced? From the area managers, this is their question, because I took a petition for them to Parliament. It was passed, but that was the end of it, and now you're going to be on this seat. The smallest unit of administration in the country is actually the village. This is where we find a person called area manager, who is supposed to be the president of that village. This person executes all manner of duties, including is the security officer, he is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. He is also the divorce court in the village. He's the one to whom people fall to when they want to divorce or they want to remarry or whatever. Do you plan in the administrative system that we are now going to review to start with the village as the basic unit of administration, and what plans will you implement to ensure these people are actually remunerated? Thank you.
Thank you. They also reconcile couples. It's not just about divorce and marriage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Being the last to talk to the nominee, Professor, you are inheriting a service, and especially the police service, whereby internationally on the police corruption index, as a country from the highest corrupt country, which I will not name, we are number 10 at the index of 7.88, and the ratio of police officers in Kenya per population is 1 police officer serving almost between 800 to 1,000, whereas the international norms, where Kenya has signed to be part and parcel, runs from 1 police officer to about 300 to 450. Professor, it is important to have a view of this as you take up this most important docket. If you are approved by this House, there are several scenarios. One scenario is members of parliament put up police stations, police posts, and police housing, and the last regime, without public participation, collapsed some of these units, and I can attest some of those properties are idle without police officers, creating an extra exposure of risk to Kenyans involved in those areas. The new policy of I want to find out from you, what new policy will you put in place on recruitment of police officers? With this kind of index which I started with about corruption, you can be assured during recruitment, corruption is the center of who will be picked. And last is, how are you going to refurb the air wing, police air wing department in the country, so that you can be in total control of it. We know very well the air services of the police were merged with KWS, the army, and the rest, whereby they were collapsed to something which we cannot understand. And I believe you have said that you'll deal with the issue of how to refurb the police. I want to hear what you're going to do on the police air wing. Last but not least is that we have officers.
Not right. You're entitled to one question.
Okay.
You are doing the fourth.
I'm just the last person. So let me finish with that. The police,
you are not entitled to that latitude. You read that. Time up.
Okay. It is only 1 minute, Speaker, if you indulge. We have quite a number of police officers who are graduates, who have gone to school, and we are aware that for them to move forward and get better remuneration, it was stopped. What are you going to do as the in charge of the department to make sure that we look at the issue of those officers who are graduates? Thank you very much. If I've offended you, Ichungwa, sorry.
You have not offended Ichungwa. You have violated the direction of the chairman.
Thank you, Speaker, because he's repeating questions.
Deputy Speaker.
Honorable Chairman, I just wanted to follow up on the same question that Honorable Murungaru said, and I think some of my electorates have said, why don't you assure them that you will have body cameras for all police officers who are going to be interacting with the public, so they're not collecting bribes on the road and terrorizing motorists? They said it's well to take care of their welfare, but the public want you to assure them that you'll also take care of their welfare against the police officers. And lastly, I think as someone who's been falsely accused in the past, I think you didn't get an opportunity to reconfirm that on the initiation, what had been said, to confirm that did you or did you not receive 15 million from NYS. I think it's important that that goes on the record.
I didn't get the last one, Speaker, Chairman.
I said you never got an opportunity to clarify the allegation that had been made by Honorable Wundanyi Opio. So I was saying you can use this opportunity to reconfirm that you indeed, because it was not confirmed properly.
Go ahead, Professor.
Thank you, Speaker. With regard to disasters, the Security Laws Amendment Act of 2014 made a lot of progress with regard to providing a multi-agency responses to security concerns. We have the country has a humanitarian disaster preparedness and response mechanism, but that has not been well anchored in the law. My objective is to make sure that the same is properly anchored in law, but above that, to integrate the civilian interventions and responses to disasters with the security agencies, so that you have one comprehensive response which involves both civilians and also members of the security forces. With regard to alcohol, I think it's a national problem, as I have said. And I think instead of the top-down approach to the fighting of illicit brews, we may need to start conversations in the areas most affected by this menace of alcohol and drugs from the communities to help us generate the solutions, because in the past there have been very violent and decisive crackdowns on illicit brews and alcohol, and perhaps the results have not been very successful. With regard to borders and school buses, I am aware that the National Transport Safety Authority is working on policy on the transportation through border borders, transportation of school children and the use of school buses, and also transportation of dangerous goods. And that can be a good opportunity for us to define what traffic police can or should do. But on the direct question of roadblocks, I think the issue of roadblock is an outdated policy of traffic management and policy. We should move towards the digitization of road safety management to ensure that people who violate traffic rules are electronically identified and are also electronically punished, so that you don't stop not just school children, you also don't stop not just border borders, but you also don't stop somebody coming from church with his family, and because of overspeeding, exceeding the speed limit by a few kilometers per hour, you book them in a police station until the weekend is over, when you'll take them to court. There are easier ways of electronically dealing with those management of road safety. So we'll be following up on that. And those spikes and whatever are things Kenya should move away from. They don't look good. They even are sometimes causes of accidents and lack of safety on the roads. With regard to the issue of area managers, it is my view, I believe, that area managers should be compensated for the work they do without affecting the budget, because again the resource pass continues to remain the same and the needs are increasing day by day. With regard to the question of police people taking bribes, this is the lowest image problem we have in the police force. I'll take leadership in trying to ensure that the police are able to reclaim their position and dignity among the society, and we will take measures, both deterrent, but also through a reward system to ensure that it becomes, corruption becomes something that can be, is an exception within the force, by encouraging a reward system and a name and shame program within the force. With regard to prison services, yes, the reforms that we intend to do in the police service will also happen in the police prison service. And in fact, since the departure of the Honorable Mudia Warriors, Minister for Home Affairs, prison reforms have stalled. And this is an area which I think we require to be looked at afresh, with a view of making sure that these places become places of rehabilitation and correction of offenders, as opposed to places where people go to commit even further crimes when they are already in custody. Finally, with regard to recruitment, I want to promise this country and this committee that if I am approved as Cabinet Secretary for the Interior and National Administration, I will do whatever it takes to make sure that no Kenyan pays 1 shilling for their child who merits to be recruited within the police service, the prison service, and other formations under this ministry.
Thank you, Professor. Let me also ask you just 2 questions. The first one, Professor, is the integrity of the Kenyan passport. The Kenyan passport is said to be one of the easiest to forge. Criminals from our neighbors, our brothers from West Africa, and many others. As foreign minister, I encountered cases where there were nationals of Zambia, Guinea, Nigeria, all these countries, in jails, particularly in Asia, China, Thailand, where narcotic crimes are punished very heavily. and are profiled and identified there as Kenyans because they have forged and are carrying Kenyan passports. What are you going to do as minister to enhance the integrity of our passport? Number two, in comparable jurisdictions, getting a passport is a right of every citizen. In fact, many countries like the UK, they don't have any other identification document other than the passport. In this country, getting a passport is an extremely tedious process. There are people who queue for up to a year, 2 years. You want to travel out of the country, to get an entitlement of a travel document, you have to bring all manner of documents to prove that you are entitled to what you should have. What are you going to do about this? The last one is what you have just been talking about, roadblocks. And you and I have discussed this before. In 2016, I remember calling the then IG. From Eldoret to Bungoma, where I come from, is under 100 kilometers. And on one morning, I drove from Eldoret to Bungoma, and I counted 24 roadblocks. 24. Each roadblock is being manned by an average of 4 to 6 police officers. And you could see no crisis that warranted either those numbers at each roadblock or those numbers of roadblocks. I remember President Kagame of Rwanda asking President Kibaki to reduce roadblocks because businessmen from Rwanda were finding it difficult to transact their business by transporting cargo from Mombasa to Rwanda because of the number of roadblocks, which were also toll stations. What are you going to do to eliminate this menace? Thank you. And may I also disclose to the committee that the Honorable nominee is a very close friend to me. We have practiced law together, and we research and write some things together in furtherance of the law.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman and honorable members, with regard to forgery of the Kenyan passport, the e-passport features introduced in 2017 September goes a long way in upgrading the security features and the status of the Kenyan passport internationally. Unfortunately, the uptake has been slow. Until now, only 1.6 million Kenyans have converted their old passports into the e-passports out of the 3.5 million Kenyans who own passports. The deadline has been extended, and under the East African Community Protocol, I think the deadline now has been extended to December, 30th November. But I doubt that even with that extension, there will be many more Kenyans because of the reasons, some of which you have highlighted. So this forgery issue, once every Kenyan has an e-passport, will be something that perhaps will be a rare occurrence. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, I believe, just like the chair does, that a passport is a basic identity document. In fact, every Kenyan should have a passport. And to this end, I believe also, in line with the Kenya Kwanza manifesto of a bottom-up approach and empowering people, one way of empowering people is to make people, even at the grassroots, empowered even to move out of the country for trade, for business, for whatever venture they may want to engage in. So I hope that we can move this 3.5 million passport to about 10 million passports in 5 years.
And it will help you collect revenue.
Absolutely. It's one industry. You are right, Honorable Chair, because this is one sector which government really doesn't need to spend a lot of investment in terms of resources. because it generates revenue for government. Number two, Honorable Chair, with regard to what we are going to do to make sure many more Kenyans acquire passport, we are going to increase the passport submission centers. Right now, there are about 7 passport submission centers. The intention is to ensure in the next 5 years there is a passport submission center in every county of our country. Other than that, for Kenyans who live abroad, it is intended that we, subject to the approval of this House, will ensure that we increase the number of passport submission centers from the current 7, namely New York, Washington, London, Berlin, Pretoria, I think Qatar. We will increase from 6 or 7 to about 25 within the diaspora in the next 5 years. Mr. Chair, allow me also finally to say, however, the printing of passports must remain centralized. The submission of passports could have as many centers as possible, but the printing for purposes of security must remain, just like printing money, must remain centralized. And therefore we will be empowering the Immigration Department with capacity to offer centralized printing services. Finally, on roadblocks, as I have said, Chair, I agree with you. This is a very archaic method where you put spikes. In fact, it's an obstruction of traffic. But you know, it's something we have gotten used to as a country for a long time. So you can't really blame the police as such. But we must move towards intelligent ways, and by intelligent I mean technology. Intelligent road safety management systems where we identify and punish road users who offend the law without necessarily causing obstruction or creating ugly scenes and traffic jams and accidents on the road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor. I'll give you 3 minutes to tell us what you wish this committee to do with you and for you.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that opportunity, this opportunity to address this committee. I would like to say as follows. It has been the honor of my life to be nominated by President William Ruto to serve as Cabinet Secretary for the Interior and National Administration. I remain grateful to him, and I also remain grateful to my party, through which I have grown in my career in public service. I do understand the current assignment requires me to abstain from active politics unless I am propagating government policy. That is what the law provides. I therefore want to take the opportunity to assure the President and the people of Kenya I will serve diligently, I will serve with integrity, and I'll apply my mind, my energies to try and resolve national security challenges that affect our homeland today, some of which have been discussed in this meeting. I also want to say that I will serve with integrity and fight within my ministry any efforts to divert public funds, misuse public funds, misuse public human resources for political or other considerations. I also promise this House I'll cooperate with Parliament and other institutions of state to serve Kenyans. Finally, if I am approved, I'll remain grateful to this House for the opportunity, and I promise I will not let Kenya down. I'll do my best for the country, and this is a solemn promise before God, before the President, before government, and before my fellow citizens. If you approve me, you will get value for that decision. Thank you, Honorable Chair. God bless Kenya, and God bless you.
Thank you, Professor. You are now released to go to your other duties, and God bless you too. I'll give you 5 minutes break, health break. 5 minutes